Okay, what is the easiest way to get started? And from my perspective, the very simplest way is a conversation between people, an interview, and it's personable, it's friendly, it's two people relating to each other, so you don't really have to worry about really talking any differently than you would to someone in ordinary conversation, except that an interview is different than a conversation. And we'll get into that in a bit, but it's two people talking to each other. And that's very simple, very, very easy technology. It's just passing the microphone. If you don't have a two microphone setup like most people do or don't, then it's just a question of making sure that the voices are, that the microphone is passed so that you can hear both people clearly. Commentary would be something like if you have one person who has a point of view, for example, who just is expressing an opinion. And now that can be fairly straightforward too, although you need a lot of preparation for that. A lot more preparation than before an interview, I would say, because a commentary, if you try to wing it, it can get really, really unfocused. And podcast, one of the terms that I really, really like is that the Ramblecast is one of the really common podcast formats out there, which means a person turns on the mic and just rambles. And what we used to be told at CBC that a commentary should be no longer than 3 minutes. And so I would say it depends who the person is and what the subject is, but it is really hard to maintain someone's attention with one voice beyond 3 minutes, which is one of the reasons why you hear commentaries which are shorter, at least on the CBC. Streeters and questions of the day can be an awful lot of fun because that's when you can just send students out and just come up with a question, and whatever answers you get, there's very, very little research that's involved in it usually, and your research, it's basically the end result is based on the responses that you get. So that's an awful lot of fun, and it doesn't take an awful lot of work to come up with a question, but it does take a fair amount of editing because generally, I don't know, you want it to be really, really quick and fast-paced, so you don't want somebody to go on with a monologue for a minute or so. So you might want as many as 10 responses and then choose the best 5, something like that. So it's more of a, it's a rhythmic thing as well. It's not just a literary form. But talking book style, this one is a little bit tricky because to do a long presentation, you need a person who has an awful lot of stamina, an awful lot of voice color, and it's like listening to somebody read something can be deadly, deadly, deadly boring. So that's why I put that in, just because it's one of the hazards. You would think it would be easy because it's already prepared for you, but the style is different in literary in books than it is for radio, and so it's maybe not as easy as it looks, but it's something which it certainly can be considered. The feature story, that's kind of synonymous in my mind with the documentary, and that's where you're getting different perspectives, you're putting in music, you're putting in a lot of color, a lot of sound effects, and so I call it a feature story because people who aren't familiar with documentaries are probably familiar with picking up a newspaper and seeing an article in the Insight section of the Globe and Mail, or the Focus section of the Globe and Mail. And you know that columns are much different. Like the commentary would be the equivalent of a column, and the feature story would be the equivalent of a feature article. The only difference is that we're actually using voices and sounds rather than quoted words. The conference address and talk, this is something that a lot of schools are starting to get into as e-learning materials. Probably not something that your students would get into too much, but it is something which educators do like to look at as a possibility. And again, it's a fairly simple kind of thing to do, provided a lot of extraneous things are edited out. Like I do a lot of conferences, for example, where things like just survival information, like the washrooms are over here and lunch is at noon and things like that are taken out. And also the technical quality has to be really, really good too, because again, I would say a general rule to keep in mind is the longer that something is, the harder you're going to have to maintain a person's attention. So the longer it is, the better the technical quality and the less leeway you have to alienate your audience's ears. So I would say that's probably about my main list, and there are probably other things, like we haven't talked about audio poetry or radio drama or things like that, but that's one of my favorite things to do is taking making art out of radio. So that's another whole level of production, which is an awful lot of fun, but I haven't included in
That's
this
good.
list.
I think the list is great as is. We don't need to make it too long. People, I think, are just looking for ideas and for places that they can get started, and this will give them lots. Colin, do you have any others that you use on a regular basis?
Well, I do a lot of point of view work that my students will do, or I try to talk to the teachers in that I do prep for and find out what kind of writing they're doing. And I really find that I mean, there's so much writing that can go into to an audio recording that I mentioned earlier, but a lot of point of views. And I'll send a link to a group of teachers in Ottawa who do this exemplary point of view kind of work. These two teachers, they have a podcast called Portable Radio that I listen to a lot, and they're really great examples of kids' work.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I would recommend. Um, I also I mainly do a lot of point of view. Let me think of what else. Or uh, I have them do some kind of writing of stories of radio kind of type stories with sound effects. Um, but again, any kind of writing, I kind of stick with the language and try to help teachers um, with what they're doing. Okay, you do the writing, I'll do the recording, and then kind of work together that way.